I'll get started. I'll start with the opening karakia, then I'll do some introductions, and then I'll be handing over to our presenter today. But our opening karakia, whakatakata hou ki te uru, whakatakata hou ki te tonga. Kia mā kene ke uta, kia mā taratara ke tai. Ehi aka ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, tihe Māori ora. So kia ora, welcome. It's really lovely to have you all here. The genesis of this webinar was that we had a TELSIG webinar last year, towards the end of last year, where we invited Richard White and Jess Howie to present on some of the CONSA work done around open access and the whole idea of transformative agreements, and the work that's been done by CAUL in this space was raised, and there was a lot of curiosity to learn more. So TELSIG this year has reached out to CAUL, and we're very graciously being given some time by Angus Cook, who joins us today, and virtually by Kate Davis, who are going to talk a bit about advancing open access through procurement and strategy. They are happy, well, Angus, who is here, is happy to take questions. Nita will be monitoring the chat. So Angus is the Director, Content and Procurement at the Council of Australian University Libraries. He has a strong commercial background, having worked for publisher and library system providers for many years. Angus leads the CAUL Content Procurement Service and has worked alongside other CAUL stakeholders in delivering new read and publish agreements to the CAUL community. Sadly, unfortunately, Kate Davis can't be here, but as I said, she's joining us virtually in the form of a prepared presentation, which Angus will introduce as well. But Kate is the Director of Strategy and Analytics at the Council of Australian University Libraries. Sorry. Kate has a background in theoretical and applied library and information research, library and information education, and digital learning and teaching. She works across CAUL's 4 strategic programs and leads CAUL's analytics portfolio. So at this point, I will say, welcome Angus, and take it away.
Great, thank you very much. That was a very kind introduction, and yes, thank you everyone for joining. I feel quite honoured and privileged to have this opportunity to give you an update on what CAUL is doing. Now, just get something happening on the screen here, so you can see some slides that should be viewable on your screens now. Yes, good. Okay, I'll just begin with our acknowledgement of country. The Council of Australian University Librarians, CAUL, acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and that the council members are located across all of Australia. We pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging for all First Nations peoples wherever they are located. So this morning, what I'd like to cover is an introduction to CAUL and its strategic programs, focusing for my part of this session during this hour on the Content Procurement Service and the open access agreements that we have in place. And then, unfortunately, because Kate's not able to join us in person today, she has done a video recording of what she would have presented had she been here, and I will run that, and then there should be plenty of time for questions. So I'll stop before playing that video to check in with everyone, see if there are any questions either in person or on the chat, and then I'll try and answer any questions that you have for Kate if I know the answer, but I may have to take some of your questions on notice, and we may have to get back to you after that. So that's what we'd like to cover in the next hour. And I realise that there's people in a mixture of roles here, and some of you will be very familiar with CAUL and what we do, and others less so, but so that we're all coming from the same starting point, I will just give that a basic introduction to CAUL and who we are and what we do. So we are the Council of Australian University Librarians. We are the peak leadership body for university librarians in Australia. And the members include university librarians of Australia and New Zealand. So every university librarian is a council member. CAUL's vision is society transformed through the power of research, teaching and learning. University libraries are essential knowledge and information infrastructures that enable student achievement and research excellence. We are an incorporated association with a set of strategic priorities that further our goals as per the vision that you see above there. We became an incorporated association only a couple of years ago. We were sort of running our systems through ANU, but by becoming an incorporated and independent organisation, it's allowed us to really expand and grow and provide many more services than we've been able to previously. So the strategic program activity focuses around advancing open scholarship, building sustainable leadership, respecting Indigenous knowledge, enabling a modern curriculum, equity, diversity and inclusion, and analytics. And we have a number of communities of practice where we engage with many institutional librarians at many different levels across areas such as analytics, transformative agreements. And just recently, we've introduced a couple of working groups to focus on some aspects of procurement, primarily on licensing. So we have a license review working group that's just commenced this year. Another working group focusing on law content providers, Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, CCH, those sorts of organisations. And there are librarians on both those working groups from Australia and New Zealand, so it's great to get that broader regional engagement. So pretty much the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points on this slide, Katie looks after. She's got a very broad portfolio where I'm very much focused on the content procurement service. And Kate will discuss much of what she's doing across those different programs when you see the video shortly. So I'll focus now on the content procurement service and what we do here. The membership is all Australian and New Zealand universities participate in the consortium. And we have a number of external consortium participants, including some of the CRI libraries in New Zealand, such as Scion, have a couple of their agreements with us, Ag Research as well, just off the top of my head. So we do support some of the libraries in addition to the universities. In terms of staffing, there's myself as the Director of Content Procurement. There is our Finance and Procurement Officer, Alicia Ashley, and some of you will have been in contact with Alicia if you're a CAUL consortium member to deal with things like invoices and orders. Really everyone who works at CAUL is involved in procurement, so it's very much team activity, very much supported by our Executive Director, Mark Sutherland, and by our communications person. And it's a growing team. Just on Monday, we announced a new position at CAUL, Associate Director for Content Procurement, and that role, which we've just started advertising, will be focused entirely on our open access agreements and the work that happens around those, going into a negotiation, implementing a new agreement, and then maintaining an agreement, particularly around activity with reporting. So we're very excited to be able to announce that position. That position was voted on by all of the CAUL Council members, and I think it really shows CAUL and CAUL members' commitment to open access agreements and the work that's required in getting them in place. So very excited about that. So that's our team, and it's growing. We have within the consortium 113 different agreements. 15 of those are open access agreements. We have about 80 different providers that we work with. So again, it's quite a full portfolio. We are not advertising for new agreements from publishers necessarily. And in fact, when it comes to journals, we're telling publishers the only new agreements that we would consider for journals would be open access agreements. And we're very cautious about taking on further work because we really are quite at capacity when it comes to the other agreements such as ebooks, databases and services. Any new agreement has to offer a significant consortial benefit before we'll consider it. In terms of the benefits that the consortium brings, yeah, the first one is it should be fairly obvious. The increased bargaining power through collective action should result in preferential pricing, better product offerings, better license terms, issue resolution, and improved customer service. So we work very closely with the providers across all of these areas for all of the agreements as far as we can. One of the things that we're really trying to focus on now is streamlining procurement workflows. We know that post-COVID, many of our member institutions have been impacted financially, and the impact of that financial, of those, I suppose the effects of that hasn't been on the content or on the subscriptions, it's been on staffing levels. And we're finding that many members are trying to do the same amount of work with fewer staff. So we are looking at ways that we can streamline some of the workflows associated with content acquisition. So that's been a focus. We provide infrastructure around procurement in terms of FTE modelling, license models. This is one of the things that the license working group has just actually completed. And that is a review of the license template that we ask small publishers to use for our read and publish agreements. So rather than working on the license that they provide us, we get them to work on our license. We know that license. We don't need to negotiate it any further. We don't actually need to, unless they've made any changes, we don't need to read it. We just need them to sign it. So that is one way that we look at streamlining some of the work that we do. And then we provide CRM through primarily through a service, a web service that we use called Consortium Manager, where every consortium member can actually see all of their agreements. They can see all of the pricing. They can go through a number of processes there in terms of approving orders, seeing title lists. Everything used to be done with spreadsheets before that at CAUL, so we're very grateful that there's a robust and reliable service that we contract called Consortium Manager to provide that software infrastructure. In terms of our governance, there is a content procurement service, which consists of a chair who's currently Bob Garrity, who's the University Librarian for Monash. We are very fortunate in having Bob as the chair. He's had much experience in many different environments with consortium, managing consortia and managing consortia agreements. So very lucky to have Bob. There are two CAUL member representatives, Jeanette Burke from the University of Tasmania and Hero McDonald, University Librarian for Deakin, represent Australian universities. There is a University Librarian from New Zealand who is Sue from the University of Auckland, so lucky to have Sue along. And then we have two content coordinator representatives, Helen Lynch from University of Waikato and Arnott Rubinowski from Swinburne. So content coordinators, I'll talk about their role a little bit. They're very vital to how we work. And it's great that we've got a New Zealand content coordinator representative on the panel. We do really enjoy all the engagement that we get from New Zealand librarians, principally because it gives us another view and another perspective. I think New Zealand's got a strong tradition of being very innovative in library services, so we're always very, very keen to get as much participation from the New Zealand librarians as possible. And the role of the committee, it's really an advisory committee, and we report to them every 2 months. We have the meeting, but we do call on those people on that committee to help us out, to give us advice, to check on what's happening, tell us what's happening in their library in terms of a certain agreement or a certain publisher. And it's great to have people at an operational level with the content coordinators for me to call upon and sort of get advice on a particular agreement or publisher. So the content coordinators, every consortium member has a designated content coordinator, and they are really our official conduit in and out of each institution when it comes to approvals, decisions, alerting the institution as to changes from a particular provider or on a particular agreement. Those people work very closely with our team in terms of sharing back to us information about publishers and vendors. We recently put in Slack as a communication channel for content coordinators to communicate with us, but also to communicate with each other and say, hey, who's the new rep for such and such a publisher, or I've just had my renewal pricing, what are you seeing on yours? So very useful channel for people to talk to, for content coordinators to communicate and share. So absolutely vital. The content coordinators keep me on my toes, and we very much value their expertise and knowledge in the work that we do. So in terms of the volume of agreements, the university expenditure on content, roughly about half of that goes through CAUL as a CAUL agreement. So obviously a very, very significant amount. And in terms of breaking that down further, the bulk of those agreements are related to journals, and the bulk of those journals agreements lie with obviously the very large publishers such as Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, Taylor and Francis. The Pareto principle of 80-20, 80% of the volume of the content is with 20% of the publishers. So that Pareto principle very much applies here. So the bulk of what we do is related to journals, but we do have significant agreements for databases, including some of the scholarly indexing services, such as Scopus and Web of Science. The ebooks portfolio is growing a little bit every year. Infrastructure and services include services like JUSP, which is a counter usage data analysis service. And something that's grown a little bit in just recently is streaming media. We introduced a service called ClickView last year. And so that is an area that is slowly growing, but primarily our focus is on journals, and our focus within journals, our number one priority is to really migrate as many of our existing journal subscriptions into open access agreements. So when we look at that, and when we start talking about working with publishers, partnership is really important. And something that we reiterate to the publishers, we open access negotiations, because I think the dynamics of the relationship change, and that it's no longer just a customer supplier situation. There is a much higher vested interest when we start to take into account publishing within a consortium agreement. So as I mentioned, open access is very much the priority. Our first 2 agreements were introduced in 2019. We continued working with some more publishers with 2020 as we started to, I suppose, build our pipeline in regards to bringing in new, larger agreements, which we negotiated last year to commence in 2022. Springer Nature, Wiley, CUP and Oxford were the first of those, and obviously we are continuing to negotiate with many of the other large publishers throughout this year, with a view to hopefully being able to introduce some new agreements for 2023. We are seeking support a variety of open access business models, not just sort of what might be called traditional read and publish, if there is such thing as traditional read and publish, but also publish to open as well is something we've actually just recently announced a national agreement with annual reviews, where if our members continue to subscribe with annual reviews at current levels, back file access is actually thrown open to all of Australia and New Zealand. And that's just based on geolocation. Annual reviews will just recognise anyone coming in from either of those countries and give them access to that back file content. Front file content is all open access anyway. So that's one example of where we're trying to sort of maintain diversity across types of agreements. The agreements that we have, large, medium and small, that you see there, we have a web page for each of these agreements so that you'll be able, these are our LibGuide pages, you'll be able to see all of the details for each agreement and which universities are participating in them as well. So that's a little snapshot of where we're at in terms of the publishers. And then in terms of supporting these agreements, one of the things that we stress to the publishers as we're discussing licensing arrangements, it's the importance of the amount of infrastructure that we actually provide. So LibGuides, as I've mentioned, reporting is a very, very important aspect. Katie's actually just done a fantastic job of introducing Tableau to show publishing reports for our agreements. Communications support is very, very important going into an agreement, implementing the agreement, and after the agreement. So we do a lot of work around webinars and briefing documents, and that'll be very much a task for our new person coming into that role. And then another thing that we do is we support services that support open access and provide additional infrastructure through services such as SCOS and the Directory of Open Access Journals. So this is my last slide, actually. This is just from our webpage on the fast track to OA Toolkit for publishers. And again, this is just an example of some of the work that we do in streamlining coming to these agreements and the templates that we provide for pricing, licensing proposals, and publication reports. So that was the last of my slides. I see there's a few things in chat, but no questions. So if it's okay, what I might do, just to make sure that we've got enough time for all of Katie's video to play, I might play Katie's video now and then we'll come back to questions with whatever time is left.
That sounds great. Yep, perfect.
Okay, so bear with me as I try and navigate this technology to get the video to play.
Just while Angus is loading up that, just a reminder that you can pop questions into the chat, neither is monitoring it.
Okay, you should see the video, and I'm Matt, hit play. Can somebody just confirm that they can see the video?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning. Thanks very much for the invitation to come along and speak today. I'm very sorry I can't be here in person. My name's Kate Davis. I'm the Director of Strategy and Analytics at the Council of Australian University Librarians, and I work closely with Angus Cook, who will also be speaking with you today to advance the open scholarship agenda in Australia and New Zealand. In my case, through CAUL strategic programs, our communities of practice, and the analytics portfolio. So what I thought I'd do today is share with you a little bit about what CAUL's been doing in the last 18 months or so to progress the open space through those different parts of the CAUL business. So let me start out by telling you a little bit about the Enabling a Modern Curriculum program. So CAUL has 4 strategic programs: Advancing Open Scholarship, Enabling a Modern Curriculum, Respecting Indigenous Knowledge, and Building Sustainable Leadership. 2 of those programs, Advancing Open Scholarship and Enabling a Modern Curriculum, have a strong focus on open, either open education or open scholarship. So in the Enabling a Modern Curriculum program, we do a lot of work around open educational resources, and we currently have 3 projects underway, some of which you might have heard about. The first of them is the Open Educational Resources Collective pilot, and I'll dig into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. The other 2 open educational resources projects that we have happening are the OER Professional Development Project, which is a project to develop an extended professional learning opportunity that will take place over a couple of months for people to learn about the basics and more advanced aspects of open educational resources. And we hope to launch the first iteration of the program towards the end of September this year. The third project is the OER Advocacy Project, and in this project there's a team working to develop a toolkit to support library staff in advocating for open educational resources in their institutions. But let's dig in a little bit more about the Open Educational Resources Collective. The collective provides a shared open textbook publishing platform for participating CAUL member institutions. So we have 30 institutions that are participating as full participating members, and we've just added another 2 as non-publishing members who are in to participate in the community building and capability building parts of the program, but aren't publishing on the CAUL platform because they have their own. So the collective facilitates both independent publishing by authors at participating institutions, as well as collaborative and cross-institutional publishing. That collaborative cross-institutional publishing will be the focus of phase 2 next year, where we'll have some grants that are designed to support collaborative projects across institutions. So the collective has really been designed to build community and capacity across CAUL member institutions in both Australia and New Zealand, and to support open textbook publishing. So there's really 3 objectives to the collective. The first is to build infrastructure, capacity, and achieve tangible outcomes to move the OER agenda forward in Australia and New Zealand. The second is to facilitate collaborative authoring and publishing of open textbooks in targeted priority disciplines. And the third is to allow member institutions to publish their own textbooks in disciplines of their choosing. So CAUL member institutions at various stages in their OER journey are participating in the collective, and it's really appropriate for everyone across that kind of lifespan or across that evolution of that journey. So the aims of the collective are really about allowing members with different goals and different needs to benefit from the collective. We draw on the strengths of the networks within the CAUL membership to encourage cross-institutional collaboration on open textbooks and facilitate knowledge sharing. This is the broad model for the Open Educational Resources Collective. It's governed by a governance group comprising representatives from participating institutions. At the moment, we have 1 participation tier, the Connect tier, but next year we'll be adding a second tier, the Drive tier. The Drive tier is the one that will focus on the collaborative publishing. So in the Connect tier, institutions this year are focusing on their DIY publishing, so publishing their own textbooks. And in fact, many of the institutions this year aren't planning to start publishing on the platform. They're really trying to build that capability, get projects moving, and get ready to start publishing next year. So as part of participating in the collective, institutions have 2 what we call bookshelves or spaces to publish on the collective Pressbooks platform that they can use for DIY publishing. So the actual publishing is underpinned by the platform. The platform is Pressbooks and it's provided by CAUL. By capacity building through training, guides, templates, having local institutional champions, through community of practice training sessions, and most particularly through our publishing workflow guide, which guides people through the entire life cycle of publishing an open textbook. Then there's the community. So we have 2 communities of practice, one for library staff and one for academic authors. And these communities of practice are really a space for people to share knowledge, ask questions, and also benefit from some training. The communities of practice operate based around topics. So the topics run for, say, 6 to 8 weeks. And during each topic, there's a meeting of both the authors community of practice and the library staff community of practice, which is roughly half training and half discussion. During the topics, we also facilitate discussion on the email lists and via Slack. The final piece of the puzzle that underpins the publishing is one of the most important aspects, and that is the grants program. So as part of the collective, the participating institutions, their academic authors can apply for collective grants. We have just today, or yesterday rather, announced the 2022 grant round, and we've awarded 15 grants totaling $34,500 to institutions across Australia and New Zealand for a diverse range of textbooks on topics that are all the way from health science through to statistics, hard science topics, law, there's an anthropology book in there, so a really diverse range of books. And this is a really important piece of the puzzle because while we know that open textbooks are free to students, they are not free to produce, and there are all sorts of costs associated, not just the academics' time, but things like editing, library staff time for copyright approvals and permissions or copyright tracking, getting graphic design done. There's a whole range of costs associated with producing an open textbook. And we wanted to provide some support for authors to help them along that journey. If you want to find out what books were funded this year, you can head to the collective website, which is oercollective.caul.edu.au, and head to the grants page and you'll find there a list. So this is just another way of really summing up the model. Which I've talked about already, so I won't spend too much more time on it. But it is that platform, capacity building, community and grants. And that is the model altogether. So far, we think it's going really well. We've had really positive feedback from both authors and library staff. And it's really been a pleasure of a project to be involved in. It's something where we can make a real difference to students and to the academic experience of writing an open textbook. I mentioned earlier that we have a guide that focuses on the publishing workflow. This is called the OER Collective Publishing Workflow Guide, very creatively named. And you can see on screen here, this is really something that we spent a considerable amount of time and resources developing at the start of this year. This is the workflow model. It has 7 phases: initiate, plan, draft, design, review, publish, and evaluate. And what we've done here is tried to develop all of the materials that libraries need in order to be able to facilitate a publishing process. So we know that if we were all to, across 30 institutions, develop our own resources and our own templates for all the different things that go into publishing an open textbook, that would be a huge waste of resources. Instead, we've used the collective as an opportunity to develop this so that people can pick it up and use it or adapt it for their local institutions. That is also linked from, that guide is linked from the OER Collective website. So that's a bit about what we're doing with Open in the Enabling a Modern Curriculum program. And I'll just whiz straight on and talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the Advancing Open Scholarship program. So at the moment in the Advancing Open Scholarship program, this has been one of our most active programs over the years. It's had some significant gains with advocacy, and it's really been I guess, one of our lighthouse programs in terms of the influence that the program director, who was formerly Catherine Clark from Curtin University, she's now at the State Library of Western Australia. Catherine, working closely with Jenny Barber from Open Access Australasia, really made some significant progress in 2020 and 2021 around the open agenda. And as they kind of move forward with that advocacy work, we also had some capacity to take on some projects in this space. So at the moment, we have 2 projects going, both are nearing completion. The first is the Libraries and Open Publishing Case Studies project. This team has developed a series of 5 case studies around different types of open publishing supported by academic libraries, institutional repositories, university presses that publish journals, university presses that publish monographs, subject and other repositories, and also transformative agreements. So these case studies feature, they talk about both the library initiative and the researcher experience of the library initiative. We're in the final stages of finalising this, and we'll be publishing these case studies shortly, and we hope that this is something we can continue to develop over time. What we found as part of the advocacy work in the program is that having these kinds of case studies to hand can be really helpful when we're going into conversations with government or other senior leaders, so that we can show them what's happening in that open space. The second project is the Fair and Open Non-Traditional Research Outputs project. And this project is focusing on how we make non-traditional research outputs findable, accessible, and open. So this team has done a huge amount of data collection. They've done a survey of libraries across Australia. They've done interviews with Australian researchers. They've done interviews with Australian library staff. They've done a literature review and environmental scan. And what they're doing now is a synthesis of all that work. And they're focusing on developing a framework to support academic libraries in making fair and making non-traditional research outputs fair and open. And so that one is coming to a close too in the next couple of months. Please ignore that recruitment information QR code. I just realised I hadn't taken that off from a previous presentation. But this team is coming to the end of that work, and I think it'll be really exciting to see what comes out there in the next little while. Another part of my role is looking after CAUL's communities of practice, and we have a whole range of communities of practice within CAUL. And I thought I'd just highlight for you today one that's key in this space, and that is the Transformative Agreements Implementation Community of Practice. So Angus will be talking to you about the progress that has been made with getting these transformative agreements in place. We realised that there is also a need to support library staff in doing the work of implementing these agreements. And so we've created this Transformative Agreements Implementation Community of Practice. It meets monthly, and it has an email list, and it's a space for people who do the work on the ground in terms of the implementation, author liaison, liaison with publishers. It's a space for people to have conversations about the work they're doing with that implementation, and to help them to really understand how to do the work and how to evaluate the effectiveness of those agreements. So that has really just kicked off in earnest in the last couple of months. We've had a couple of meetings of the community of practice, including, for example, one last week that was focused on caps and managing caps and how we do that moving forward. The other community of practice that we have that operates in this open or research space is the Research Support Community of Practice, or CARES. It's basically an email list in this case, and it operates fairly organically, has been operating for a number of years, and is a place for people who work in the research support or scholarly communication space to ask questions of each other and support each other as practitioners. The final thing I wanted to mention today that is part of my portfolio that's probably of interest to you related to transformative agreements is that I also look after CAUL's analytics portfolio. And as part of the analytics portfolio, we have the CAUL Statistics Service, which has been running for a very long time and has an amazing longitudinal data set that we make available to members via our Tableau online instance. We also now are increasingly providing data and analysis of publishing patterns under transformative agreements via Tableau. So I'm just going to go live to Tableau now and give you a quick look at what we're doing on Tableau. All right, so Angus will talk to you some more about the range of transformative read and publish agreements we have in place. At the moment, we are providing reporting for 3 of those agreements via Tableau. Those are agreements that we have with Wiley and Springer and Oxford University Press. Now, these are 3 agreements that have caps on them, so we've prioritised developing reporting workflows for these agreements. But over the next little while, we'll be progressively adding all of our agreements to Tableau so that institutions can self-serve and access the data they need. It's important that we offer this service because there is quite a bit of interpretation that needs to happen with the data that the publishers provide in order to understand really what's going on with the publishing reports. For some of the publishers, there's also quite a bit of cleanup that needs to happen. So it just makes sense for us to do this centrally for the sector so that institutions don't have to do it themselves. So let's jump in and have a bit of a look at the Wiley dashboards. So there's 4 dashboards for each agreement. The first one is an article level report, which just lists out all the articles that have been published year to date up to the last date when we ingested data. There's a bit of a lag on these. Wiley do a bit of work on the data before they give it to us. So there's always about a month's lag there. There tends to be less of a lag with Springer because we can self-serve that data. Oxford also has a bit of a lag. And so we always point people to our read and publish guide, which has the most up-to-date approval statistics, which is important because this is a capped agreement and people need to know where we're sitting at any stage. So this provides a snapshot of the data. It can be filtered by institution or by month, and then people can also download the data as a crosstab so they can work with it offline as well. We also provide institutional metrics, which shows us the number of articles published by institution. This can be filtered by institution and also by approval month. This dashboard also shows us the APC value, so the article processing charges, based on the, in this case, list price of an APC for the given journal. The next dashboard is the article subject discipline metrics, and what we do here is provide a breakdown of the number of articles and the APC value by subject or discipline. And again, this can be filtered by institution and approval month. And on the final screen, we have some other article metrics. The first is the license type breakdown, which tells us what licenses have been applied to the open articles. And we have the articles per month data, which shows us how many articles are approved each month. And you can see that it does kind of go up and down. June's very low because we only have the first 7 days of the month in here. The final chart at the bottom is the articles by type, and this gives us a breakdown of the different types of articles that have been approved as part of the agreement. So you can see here that research articles are by far the greatest type, followed by original articles. So we do that for, as I said, for the 3 capped agreements, and we'll be adding other agreements as soon as we're able to finalise reporting formats with publishers, which will happen over the next little while. So that was really a whirlwind kind of tour of what happens in the CAUL strategy, analytics and communities of practice portfolios related to open. And I just want to say thanks very much for having us along today. While I'm not here, I'm very happy to take questions. Probably the quickest way to get me is via Twitter. I'm Katie Davis on Twitter, or you can send me an email at kate.davis@caul.edu. .au. And Angus knows a great deal about all of this too, so I'm sure he'd be very happy to answer your questions as well. Thanks very much, everyone.
There we go.
So thank you for that, Angus, and please send our thanks to Katie as well. If people have questions, you can either use the chat or feel free to ask anything verbally. I do actually have one question I would like to raise. So perhaps while other people are thinking, I'll bring this one up. It's probably more for you, Angus, and it's a bit of a juicy one, to be honest. But part of the reason that there was quite a discussion around bringing CAUL along to talk about the read and publish deals was partly because of the interest in the on whether they are effective, truly effective in bringing about change towards open access, because there is a school of thought around read and publish that what they're really doing is just entrenching the traditional publishing model and allowing publishers to continue to dictate high prices for being able to publish. So, and locking potentially institutions into deals where perhaps there's a 0% increase in the first year, but in the second and third years of these deals, those increases can be increased quite a lot. But so, as somebody who's working in this space at the cold face, I wondered if you would like to speak to some of those criticisms or to give your own kind of observation and experience in this area.
Sure. It is a juicy question. I certainly agree. And I think what we have to remember is that a read and publish agreement is not necessarily the end goal to having all content as version of record open access on the publisher's platform. It is in many ways the first step towards that. And as I've said in other presentations and other forums, is that the agreements that we see this year and next year may look very, very different from what we're working with in 5 or 10 years' time. But given the resources that we have, which is primarily the subscription spend, this is what we're able to achieve as a starting step along that journey. It's interesting, Bob Geraghty was at the ESAC meeting in Munich a couple of weeks ago, and ESAC is an organisation which really acts as an information clearinghouse about open access agreements across the world, a very, very useful resource to us. And there does seem to be very few real transformative agreements in place anywhere with any publisher globally at the moment. We're working towards that with one of the publishers that we're negotiating with at the moment. But there are so many different aspects to and implications at an institutional level, so beyond the library in terms of funding these agreements, that we need to sort of take it in a progressive approach in terms of, okay, read and publishing achieves a certain outcome. It's not perhaps truly where we want to be, but it's we certainly see it as the starting point. If we were in Europe and if we'd had Plan S as a catalyst to further access, which we don't in this region, it might be a little bit different, because those institutions we're seeing a little bit more prepared to fund open access centrally. There have not, from my perspective, there has not been a great deal of conversation beyond the library to the institution about funneling extra funding into the library to support open access where it is needed. In many cases, there are enormous disparities or differences between the high publishing institutions that may end up paying more at an institutional level to cover the cost of their publishing versus the institutions that publish very little. So these inequities can become legacy issues. So our first priority at the moment really is to, I suppose, transpose as much of that subscription spend into the highest volume of publishing that we can negotiate with the publishing. That's how we've landed up with the agreements that we have at the moment. We're sort of continuing on that path for the time being, but we are now starting to look at talking to some of the publishers about a truly transformative agreement, and looking at how we we step that pricing redistribution across our members, and for that member in terms of if the value of the publishing is actually higher than the value of the subscription, the likelihood is that they will have to pay more to cover that. Whereas some of our members may actually end up paying less than their current subscription at. So a whole number of factors, but certainly you know, just because we announce a new read and publish agreement, it doesn't mean that we're going to stick with that format for the next 10 years. But it is important to recognise that these things can easily become legacy issues. This is the issue that we currently have with a lot of the subscription pricing, in that it is predicated on print holdings from 20 years ago. And we're still dealing with the issues and the legacy of that. And we certainly don't want to be carrying forward you know, legacy pricing that's related to subscription in a model that should be purely related to publishing volume.
So Nita, yep.
Thank you, Angus. We do have 2 questions coming through the chat, so it would be good to address them. So the first one is from Philip Washington, and he says, what does the small slice of infrastructure cover? Are there any plans or thoughts of shared journal publishing infrastructure? Philip, are you there? Would you like to join us?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Hi, Philip. How are you? Good to see you here. All right. Well, you know, here is the floor is open. So Angus and Philip, you're welcome to just elaborate that.
So could you just reiterate the question, Philip, around journal infrastructure?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about institutional publishing, academic publishing, university presses for journals, and whether there's any thoughts in future of providing shared infrastructure so that we move away from reliance on commercial publishers.
CAUL is certainly not investigating publishing infrastructure for journals at this stage. We're focusing on ebooks at the moment, because that's really and textbooks in particular, because that's really where we see sort of more. I think we're prioritising that because we see there's more ground to be gained there very quickly, or more quickly. I think it's publishing infrastructure itself for journals, not something that we're looking at the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
And there was another question in chat about OA only publishers. Yes, we have. Earlier last year, we spoke to PLOS, and I had a communication again from them this year. When we looked at PLOS, the pricing model wasn't beneficial. Going into a sort of a centralised payment system for them was actually going to cost our members more at an institutional level. So we didn't see the point in that. So we'll review that again, I expect, next year. I did ask PLOS to have another look at that early this year, and I haven't heard a refreshed proposal, so I'm assuming that it's no better. We've also looked at I'm just trying to think who the other one is. Sorry, I haven't had my fill of coffee this morning. Hi, Richard.
I can just ask about a couple if you like. Yeah. So that was my question. Hi, Angus. How are you doing? So you know, we're doing the Consul analysis of we're in our 5th year of data, looking at the. Jess, Howie, and I have reported to this very group actually about that Consul work that's ongoing. So it's just really interesting watching the OA only publishers. So Frontiers would be a big one. MDPI would be another one, Hindawi to a lesser extent. But what we're definitely seeing a trend of is, so the paid gold, so in other words, immediately OA incurs an APC for every article in that particular publication. Our researchers are definitely publishing more and more in those. So I'm just looking at our local Otago data, but the volume has doubled in 5 years that we're publishing with those kinds of publishers. And of course, the library has never had a relationship with those. that's just the researchers dealing directly with the publishers. So I'm just interested generally in how much you're kind of, not necessarily the specifics, but how much you're tracking that kind of change in our researcher behavior, because it's a very noticeable trend that they're going more that way. And I know in some places they have signed deals with PLOS or whoever, like you're saying, and you've obviously looked at that one, but so what are your comments sort of more generally?
Frontiers, we've also done some work on this year. In fact, we put out a survey to CAUL members this year on their interest in moving to a consortial agreement where there's an element of centralised payment. Again, the payment for APIs, APCs on articles Frontiers is not something typically managed by libraries, so that would involve the setting up funding from the institution to be channeled through to the library so that they could pay for APCs centrally, or through CAUL managing that. The value that Frontiers was offering for that centralised payment was simply a 10% reduction in price, which we did not feel was significant enough to cover or provide enough benefit for the extra administration and risk if CAUL was actually involved in transfer of money around that. We felt that was fairly light. There was not enough interest shown by our members to pursue a consortial agreement with Frontiers, so we've left that one alone for the moment. Again, we will sort of continually monitor, because as you say, Richard, we've seen it as well. We can see the statistics. There's that, and we're actually quite surprised. Really, particularly with publishers such as MDPI.
We've quadrupled in that 5-year period in the number of articles we're publishing with MDPI. So our researchers are obviously, I heard varied reports about how good they are as a publisher in terms of the quality and the editorial standards and that sort of thing. Some people say it's great, other people don't, but the numbers are telling us people are using it. So,
Yeah. And again, in Europe, there may be more agreements because Plan S is probably create some impetus there. MDPI, they will offer, they do offer a 10% discount, and it's as simple as going onto their website and filling in a form, and they will offer any institution a 10% discount. So it may be worth just checking with MDPI to make sure your institution has done that. You might as well take the 10% for the sake of spending a couple of minutes for filling in a form online. So that's where we're up to with the pure OA publishers. We've looked, we'll keep reviewing, and if there's sort of any likelihood of something that's a bit more attractive to us in this region, we'll let everyone know.
It's really tricky, as you say, because the library hasn't had that relationship. So you are talking about money that's been coming from somewhere else to pay that stuff.
So I think that's all the questions we've got, and it kind of brings us to perfectly on the hour, really. So I will finish with a closing karakia and encourage everybody here who might have further questions to get in touch with Angus and Katie at CAUL and start that korero with them. And again, just one final thank you to you, Angus, and please again let Katie know we really appreciated you coming and sharing it with us today. So
I would just like to add one more thing. So please feel free, also welcome to post your questions as well through LIANZA Connect new platform, which we monitor pretty much daily. So we could address some of those questions there as well as sending them directly to Angus as well and Katie. So we'll look forward to that. Kia ora.
Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapanui. Ke watia, ke mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara tākata. Koia rā I rongo, whakairia, aki ki runga, kia tina, huie, tai kie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Angus, so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers.